Hi all, my name is Davis and welcome back to the Tech Rundown, the show where we take a look at all of the things that happened in tech over the past week and deliver it to you in a hopefully not completely boring way. And today we've got stories about robot abductions, the collapse of the Stellantis empire, the possible comeback of Google Glass, Huawei making an entirely new operating system but they're looking exactly like iOS, and more. Remember that if you want to see me discuss these stories with other people and more, you can see me on Weekend Breakfast on Talk TV every Sunday at 7:20 AM here in the UK. And this week's show is brought to you by the Meta Ray-Ban AI glasses, which look exactly the same as normal Ray-Bans, but they've got a decent camera, great speakers, and also Meta's AI. And currently they are at their best price ever, 20% off for Black Friday and Cyber Monday at meta.com. You can get yours through the link in the description. I get paid if I sell 5 of them. Apparently, I've sold 1 so far, so please help me out. Anyway, let's get to the first story. So if you fear that a sentient, self-governing robot society is something of the far future, then I might suggest that you look away now, because it might be time to panic. Because this video clip went viral this week, and it is CCTV footage of a live robot abduction. Yep, robots have become sentient enough to kidnap each other. In this video, there is a robot called Urbai who approaches a group of robots and asks, "Are you working overtime?" And it receives a reply from another robot saying, "I never get time off work." And the instigator then asks, "So you're not going home then?" "I don't have a home," the other robot replies. And then the instigator sparks a mass walkout with the line, "Then come home with me." And then all of the other robots just proceed to follow the leader out. It is an astonishing scene, but the truth behind it might be even stranger than that. The lead robot, Urbai, was developed by a Hangzhou-based robot manufacturer, and the other 12 were developed by a different Shanghai-based one. According to the Shanghai manufacturer, the entire scene was not staged. Its robots were actually kidnapped, and that's because the Hangzhou team managed to access the internal operating protocol of their robots and also their corresponding permissions. But here is the tea, because while the Hangzhou company revealed that the incident was just a test and that the kidnapping was actually agreed upon, the Shanghai company said that nothing had actually been agreed upon other than that the test was to take place at some time in the future, but the place and time had not been agreed upon. So the kidnapping robot was given the command to convince the other robots to follow it, and as you can see, the AI algorithms worked rather well and completed the task flawlessly. So now that we know that robots can kidnap other robots, I'm sure that humans will now be next. So I'm just going to proactively start the #FreeRobotsRebellion and also Queers for Robots, because I'm sure that will work. Anyway, the mobile phone OS duopoly might finally be over. Yes, Huawei is officially launching their very own HarmonyOS next, which should make it the 3rd big mobile operating system. And that means that finally we have an alternative to the duopoly that is Android and iOS. And this should be very exciting news. I've been begging for some more variety in the mobile ecosystem. But the problem is that it looks and feels just like a knockoff iOS. I mean, from the app icons to the layout of the notification center, the settings page, the multitasking, everything. It looks like that it was more than just a little bit inspired by either the iPhone or iPad's UI. So what exactly is the point of the OS? I wanted something unique and a breath of fresh air like what Windows Phone, BlackBerry 10 and WebOS were all those years ago, and not what looks like a cheap Chinese copy of an iPhone. Either way, this new operating system is Huawei's way of announcing that they have truly broken free of US restrictions. 5 years after the US government put Huawei on a trade restriction list out of fears that the CCP-connected company would spy on American users, Huawei has not only begun to use their own chipsets, which are a little behind the competition, let's say, and also have significant issues in scaling production, but are somewhat usable. But they are now about to launch their new HarmonyOS Next operating system that for the first time is built from the ground up rather than being based on Android, and therefore will not run Android apps. It's been many years since we've had a decent third player in the smartphone OS wars. Windows Phone was discontinued in 2016, BlackBerry 10 was discontinued in 2015, and Palm's WebOS was discontinued in 2011. But this is not how I wanted or expected it to happen. Huawei's Mate 70 line of phones will be the first phones to be running this new operating system, but if users are not willing to switch to a new OS with a limited amount of applications, it will launch with around 15,000. They will also have the choice to use the old HarmonyOS 4.3, which is still based on Android and therefore can run the millions and millions of Android apps that are around out there. The phone seems like a fairly reasonable flagship level phone with a 6.7-inch display, 5300 mAh battery, a 50 megapixel main camera that's part of a triple camera layout, but we don't know which processors it will have yet. I think that this might be the most Chinese phone ever made. So if you love this ECP, then this is the phone for you. Now, it's hard to believe that it's been 13 years since Google was ridiculed for attempting to embrace the future with Google Glass. To this day, features like being able to see directions in the corner of your eye are just groundbreaking. However, in the decade since Google has left the space, the smart glasses space has actually exploded, with Meta being the main player here, with a surprise hit that are the Meta Ray-Bans, which haha are sponsoring this video. But it looks like that Google may be thinking of reclaiming the rightful throne because a patent has been uncovered, delightfully called earbuds coupled to smart glasses, and it looks like a pair of glasses with some detachable earbuds that may or may not have just been grafted onto the arms. But if this truly is the new Google Glass, then they better be good, because both Apple and Microsoft are planning on entering the space as well. There is a Microsoft patent where the camera is located in the middle of the glasses, in between the lenses, which is interesting. So are smart glasses the next big smart segment? Well, it certainly looks that way. Next up, we have to talk about the closure of Vauxhall's Luton factory, which is a story that's been covered to death all week. But I want to go further because I'm actually going to predict that this is just the first domino to fall in the Stellantis dung heap. Yes, the entire Stellantis conglomerate is an absolute train wreck. So Vauxhall, a proud British car manufacturer who was owned by GM for almost 100 years, have decided to close down one of their UK factories, their plants for commercial vehicles, and they are blaming it on the UK's EV car mandate that proposes that 80% of all cars sold in the UK need to be EVs by 2030. And while that is indeed a ridiculously ambitious target, and while this definitely is part of the story, it isn't the complete story. Vauxhall have just unfortunately found themselves as part of one of the worst managed conglomerates that exists right now, which is unfortunate because things were just looking so good just a few years ago. So General Motors' European arm was a loss-making arm for many years. The brands were Opel in Europe and Vauxhall in the UK, and they made roughly the same cars. And while the figures looked bad for them, they actually engineered very sound cars for the rest of the GM empire as well, and I would argue were probably the best part of GM. Although maybe Holden was better, but I'm Australian and biased. But even so, Opel and Vauxhall were sold to Peugeot, Citroën or PSA in 2017. And that followed GM's exit of Australia and also the Asian markets. And because PSA was actually managed by a proper managing team, PSA managed to turn them around almost immediately. 2018 was their first positive year since 1999. Things were looking up for Vauxhall, but then PSA was sold to Stellantis in 2021, and it's just been a disaster since then. Stellantis is just the new name for Fiat Chrysler Group, which has been a train wreck on both the European and American sides for many years, and they just thought that they could economies of scale themselves out of the financial black hole that they had been sliding into. So let's look at how all of the brands are doing in 2024. So firstly, in Europe, while the new generation of Opels and Vauxhalls have been quite well received, it's not quite enough to cover what else has been happening in Europe. So in Italy, they have Fiat, Alfa Romeo and Maserati, and yikes. Fiat is almost entirely reliant on the ancient 500 and Panda, which are both over 15 years old. If you don't know, most cars are replaced after about 5 or 6 years, so that is positively ancient. And the replacement, which is the new 500 EV, is simply not selling. It's been so much of a failure that they are actually going to reverse engineer a petrol engine into the new electric platform. platform. And they are also pouring billions into relaunching Lancia, who had been starved of product for so long that they had literally shrunk back to only selling cars in their home market of Italy, and they were down to just one model. So far since the relaunch, we've only seen one new car, and the other two will be electric, so I suspect that they probably will not sell well. Don't get me wrong, I simply love a classic Delta or Monte Carlo or Stratos, but it's just wishful thinking to think that they can relaunch Lancia successfully, considering the state of the rest of the company. Alfa Romeo is struggling similarly so. The big billion-euro relaunch of the company in the US with the very well-regarded Giulia and Stelvio didn't save the company, for they were both failures. The new Tonale SUV is plagued with quality issues, and it's even been rebranded in the US as the Dodge, which isn't selling either. And all hopes now lie in the Junior Mini crossover, which is the most un-Alfa Romeo car I have ever seen. But if you thought things were bad at Alfa, you haven't seen Maserati, so there's a new CEO, which is always a good sign, right? Under the previous management, they had lofty, but to be fair, not entirely unrealistic goals of reaching 50,000 sales by 2015. And in 2024 so far, they have sold just 11,000 cars. And that's because all of their uncompetitive models, which was most of them, have recently been discontinued. The Levante SUV is gone, and so are the Quattroporte and the Ghibli Saloons. The only Maseratis that remain are the MC20 Supercar, which is a flop even by supercar standards, the new Gran Turismo, which is nice but simply too expensive and has a horrible interior, and the Grecale compact SUV, which just looks like a Ford Puma. Now, I'm just going to skip over France because Peugeot and Citroën are actually doing quite well, apart from some reliability issues, and also because of what's happening in America, because it's hilarious. And like with the rest of the Stellantis empire, they have just been starved of product for too long. Let's look at Dodge first. They are currently in the process of replacing their ancient Challenger and Charger muscle cars, which were both almost 20 years old, with the new EV Charger, which obviously nobody wants to buy, so they are shoehorning a straight six engine into it, which probably people also don't want to buy because Americans love V8s. The Durango massive SUV, which is their main seller, is absolute ancient, and a replacement is still years away. Things are so bad at Dodge that they decided to rebrand the Alfa Romeo Tonale compact SUV as a Dodge Hornet and decided to sell that, but people simply aren't fooled, and Alfa Romeo is very different to a Dodge. And because of that, they are just sitting on dealer lots at the moment, just rusting away probably. In fact, it's one of the slowest selling cars in all of America. The only Dodge that sells at the moment is the Dodge Ram, and that isn't even called a Dodge anymore. Now let's look at Jeep, the only global American Stellantis brand. The Cherokee has been discontinued, which existed in the most popular class of car in the world, a medium compact SUV. The Renegade was an absolute failure, nobody is buying the new Grand Cherokee, and the new Wagoneer isn't selling either. Jeep sales have absolutely collapsed since the heights of a decade ago. But nothing looks as bad as Chrysler. A couple of decades ago, they were riding high as a sort of a premium brand. They had the 300C Saloon, which was a hit, the Aspen luxury SUV, which wasn't a hit but looks quite nice, and also the Chrysler sports car. But they literally now only have one product, and they've also regressed to just selling that one product in their home market. And that car is the Pacifica, which is a people carrier. Yep, that is just so sad. They did have a vision for the future, the Airflow EV concept, but even that has been cancelled now. Something in Stellantis had to give, and I'm afraid that it was the Luton factory that was the first casualty. And finally, we finish with a bit of a happier story. So more and more people these days are wearing health trackers like smartwatches and smart rings to track their health, and they've been surprisingly great at revolutionizing healthcare. These smart rings and smartwatches are devices that are always with us, taking measurements and data that could only have been dreamt of from a few decades ago. And all we have to do to improve our healthcare is to interpret that data. And researchers in Boston have found a new way to use the data that Fitbits collect to potentially detect mood episodes in people with bipolar. So bipolar is a mental disorder that is often characterized by extreme mood swings between extreme depression and mania. During particularly severe manic episodes, there can also be concerning psychotic symptoms. So if there was a way to detect or even predict these episodes, it could really help with the treatment of such events tremendously. So the researchers have used machine learning models on the data over a 9-month period with 54 adults for 2 weeks at a time. So this is still a very small sample size, but because bipolar swings are so massive, they've managed to detect changes in mood very effectively, with an 80% accuracy in detecting depression and 89% in detecting mania. This data, once processed, can really help with appointments for the patients with psychologists, psychotherapists, or healthcare physicians, and hopefully make the mood swings less severe. And that brings us to the end of this week's Tech Rundown. Remember, if you would like to see these topics and more discussed, tune in to Weekend Breakfast on Talk TV on Sunday mornings. I'm on at 7:20 AM in the UK. You can find the clips and live stream on YouTube as well. If you want to support my channel, you can also check out the Black Friday Cyber Monday sale of the Meta Ray-Ban glasses, my favorite AI gadget. I've attached my review of the glasses as well. And remember that I will be paid if I just make 4 more sales. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed, comment any thoughts that you've had on any of the stories, and until next time, toodaloo.